Mama Rose's farm was a splash of vibrant green against the dusty Oklahoma landscape. Rows of cornstalks stood tall and proud, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Sunflowers, like golden beacons, lined the edges of the fields, their faces turned towards the life-giving sun. Her farmhouse, painted a cheerful sky blue, sat nestled amongst the crops, a testament to years of hard work and loving care. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and freshly baked bread. Mama Rose, a woman whose age was etched into the deep lines on her face, moved with a surprising agility. Her hands, gnarled with age, were still strong and capable as she tended to her chores. She hummed a gospel tune as she watered her prized roses, their delicate petals unfurling in the morning light. But there was something else about Mama Rose, something hidden beneath the surface. A certain steeliness in her gaze, a quiet confidence in her movements. A knowingness that hinted at a life lived far beyond the peaceful confines of her farm. The worn leather-bound journal tucked away in her attic held secrets, faded photographs, maps with cryptic markings, and entries written in a code only she could decipher. They were relics of a past she rarely spoke of, a past where she was known by a different name, a name whispered with respect and fear, Viper. A legendary sniper whose skills were unmatched, a ghost who could appear and disappear without a trace. But those days were long gone, or so she thought. Now she was just Mama Rose, a sweet old lady who loved her farm and her roses. Or so everyone believed. Meanwhile, a few miles away in the rundown part of town, the Rattlers were holding a meeting. This wasn't your typical slick, organized gang. The Rattlers were more like a group of misfits, bound together by desperation and a shared lack of common sense. Their leader, a skinny kid named Snake, paced nervously in front of his crew. Snake fancied himself a criminal mastermind, but his plans usually fell apart before they even started. He wore a black bandana low over his eyes, trying to look intimidating, but his voice cracked with every other word. "All right, listen up," Snake squeaked, trying to deepen his voice. "We need money and we need it fast. My cousin Vinny's got some associates who are expecting a payment." The crew, a motley assortment of characters, grumbled in agreement. There was Twitch, a jittery guy who couldn't stand still for more than 5 seconds, Hammer, a hulking brute whose solution to every problem was brute force, and Whisper, a nervous kid who whispered everything he said even when no one was around. "So, what's the plan, Snake?" Hammer asked, cracking his knuckles. Snake puffed out his chest. "I got intel," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's an old lady living on a farm outside town. She's gotta have some cash stashed away. We hit the farm, grab the money, and we're set." Whisper nervously tugged at his collar. But what if she has a gun?" he whispered. Snake scoffed. "An old lady? What's she gonna do, bake us to death with her cookies? This is gonna be easy money, guys. Easy money." Back at the farm, Mama Rose was finishing up her evening chores. She paused, a slight frown creasing her brow. Something felt off. The wind had shifted, carrying with it a faint scent of cheap cologne and desperation, a scent she hadn't smelled in years. A crow cawed loudly from a nearby tree, its call unusually urgent. She walked over to the edge of her property, her keen eyes scanning the surrounding fields. A broken fence post, trampled weeds, and a faint tire track in the dirt, subtle signs, but enough to tell her that someone had been snooping around. She sighed, a hint of weariness in her eyes. It seemed her peaceful life was about to be disturbed. "Well now," she murmured to herself, her voice barely a whisper. "Looks like we're gonna have some company." She wasn't afraid, not in the slightest. But a sense of responsibility settled over her. She had worked too hard for this farm, for this peace. She wouldn't let anyone take it away from her. She closed the gate to her chicken coop, making sure the latch was secure. Then, she walked towards the farmhouse, her steps deliberate and purposeful. It was time to prepare. The roses would have to wait. Tonight, she had other things to tend to. Things that required a different kind of care, a different kind of strength. The kind she thought she had left behind. But it seemed some skills, once learned, were never truly forgotten. They just lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And tonight, the moment had arrived. Inside the farmhouse, Mama Rose moved with practiced efficiency. She retrieved a dusty wooden box from the attic, its contents carefully wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, nestled amongst layers of soft fabric, lay her old sniper rifle. It was a Remington Model 700, a classic, and she knew it like the back of her hand. She carefully cleaned and oiled the rifle, her movements precise and deliberate. The years melted away as she worked, and she was no longer Mama Rose, the sweet old lady. She was Viper, the silent predator, the ghost in the shadows. She gathered other supplies, extra ammunition, a pair of night vision goggles, and a well-worn map of her property. She knew every inch of her land, every tree, every ditch, every hiding place. It was her sanctuary, and she would defend it with everything she had. She set up a strategic position in her bedroom window, overlooking the main approach to the farmhouse. The window was partially obscured by climbing ivy, providing excellent cover. She adjusted the sights on her rifle, her eyes narrowed in concentration. As darkness fell, a sense of calm settled over her. She wasn't seeking a fight, but she wouldn't back down from one either. She had lived a long and full life, and she wasn't afraid of death. But she wasn't ready to go just yet. Not while there were still roses to tend to and a farm to protect. She waited, patient and watchful, like a spider in her web, ready for her prey to arrive. The night was still, but Mama Rose knew that wouldn't last for long. Under the cloak of a moonless night, the Rattlers finally arrived at Mama Rose's farm. They piled out of Snake's beat-up Ford pickup truck, their faces grim, trying their best to look like hardened criminals. Snake, clutching a rusty crowbar, led the way, whispering instructions that were barely audible above the crickets' chirping. "All right, remember the plan?" Snake hissed. "Whisper, you're on lookout. Hammer, you're with me. Twitch, you stay by the truck. And no loud noises." Of course, the plan was barely a plan at all. It consisted mostly of Snake pointing vaguely in the direction of the farmhouse and saying, "Go get the money." They stumbled through the cornfields, their progress slow and clumsy. Hammer tripped over a rogue pumpkin vine, nearly taking Snake down with him. Whisper kept whispering about the possibility of guard dogs despite Snake's assurances that there weren't any. Twitch, true to his name, couldn't stop fidgeting, his nervous energy radiating outwards like heat from a furnace. As they approached the farmhouse, they tried to be stealthy, but their efforts were laughable. They crashed through bushes, knocked over flower pots, and generally made enough noise to wake the entire county. Unbeknownst to them, Mama Rose was watching their every move through her night vision goggles, a slight smile playing on her lips. They were even more inept than she had anticipated. This wasn't going to be much of a challenge after all. Still, she wouldn't underestimate them. She knew that even the most foolish of adversaries could be dangerous when cornered. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The game was about to begin. As Snake and Hammer crept towards the front door, Whisper, true to his nervous nature, was having a full-blown panic attack by the cornfield. He kept imagining shadowy figures lurking amongst the stalks, and every rustle of leaves sent him jumping. "Are you sure there aren't any monsters?" he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Or chupacabras. Meanwhile, Twitch, left to guard the truck, was bored out of his mind. He started playing with the radio, flipping through stations until he found a catchy country tune. He began to sing along, his voice loud and off-key, completely oblivious to the fact that he was ruining any chance of stealth the Rattlers might have had. Back at the front door, Snake was trying to pick the lock with his rusty crowbar, but he was having no luck. He kept fumbling with the tool, cursing under his breath. Hammer, growing impatient, suggested a more direct approach. "Why don't we just kick it in?" he grunted, flexing his muscles. Snake considered this for a moment. "Nah," he said. "Too loud. We gotta be sneaky." Just then, the front porch light flickered on, illuminating Snake and Hammer in its bright glare. They froze, caught like deer in headlights. Oh," Hammer mumbled. From inside the farmhouse, Mama Rose chuckled softly. "Well, ain't this a fine how-do-you-do?" she murmured, adjusting her rifle. "Looks like our guests have arrived." The game was truly afoot. The moment the porch light illuminated them, Snake and Hammer instinctively ducked, bumping heads in the process. Snake dropped his crowbar with a clang that echoed through the night. "Abort! Abort!" Snake yelled, scrambling to his feet. Hammer, still dazed from the headbutt, stumbled backwards, tripping over a flower pot and sending shards of ceramic flying. Inside the farmhouse, Mama Rose took a deep breath, her expression hardening. The time for games was over. She adjusted her aim, focusing on Snake, who was frantically trying to gather his wits. A single shot rang out, shattering the night silence. It wasn't a loud, booming blast, but a sharp, precise crack that spoke of power and control. Snake yelped, clutching his left ear. He hadn't been hit, but the bullet had grazed his earlobe, leaving a stinging welt and a ringing in his head. He stared in disbelief, his bravado evaporating like morning mist. "She's got a gun," he shrieked, his voice high-pitched with panic. "I told you she had a gun." Hammer, finally recovered from his fall, looked around wildly, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. He didn't see anyone, but the sound of the gunshot had sent a shiver down his spine. "Where's she?" he stammered. "I don't see her." Mama Rose remained hidden in the shadows of her bedroom window, a ghost in the darkness. She had fired a warning shot, a clear message that they were not welcome. But she knew they wouldn't leave. Not yet. They were too desperate, too stupid, or both. And that meant she had no choice but to defend herself. The warning shot had its intended effect, chaos. Hammer, spurred by Snake's frantic screaming, pulled out a rusty revolver and started firing wildly in the direction of the farmhouse. Snake joined in, emptying his own cheap handgun towards the window, not even bothering to aim. "We're under attack," Snake shrieked, his voice cracking with terror. "Return fire! Return fire!" Back by the truck, Twitch, startled by the gunshots, jumped a foot in the air. He abandoned the radio and scrambled for cover behind the truck, his body shaking uncontrollably. Whisper, already terrified, let out a piercing scream and ran blindly into the cornfield, his whispered cries lost in the rustling leaves. The haphazard gunfire from Snake and Hammer was doing little more than peppering the farmhouse with stray bullets. They were revealing their positions with every shot, making themselves easy targets. Mama Rose sighed. She had hoped they would have the sense to leave, but it was clear they weren't going to back down. She lined up her shot, her movements calm and precise amidst the chaos. She targeted Hammer, the larger of the two, knowing he posed the greater threat. Another shot rang out, this time with a deadly purpose. Hammer grunted and clutched his shoulder, his revolver clattering to the ground. He staggered backwards, his face contorted in pain. "I'm hit," he bellowed. "I'm hit." Snake stared at Hammer in disbelief, his eyes wide with fear. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't going to be easy money after all. This was a fight for their lives. Mama Rose moved swiftly and silently through the farmhouse, utilizing her knowledge of the layout to her advantage. She slipped out the back door, melting into the shadows of the surrounding fields. She was no longer confined to the bedroom window. She was Viper, the ghost, and the fields were her hunting ground. Snake, still firing blindly, didn't realize Mama Rose had moved. He was focused on the window, convinced that was where the shots were coming from. He was an easy target, silhouetted against the porch light. Mama Rose positioned herself behind a large oak tree, using its trunk as cover. She took a deep breath, focusing her mind, shutting out the chaos and fear. She lined up her shot, aiming for Snake's gun hand. Another shot rang out and Snake screamed, dropping his handgun. He clutched his wrist, his face contorted in agony. The bullet had shattered the bones in his hand, rendering him useless. "I'm hit. I'm hit," he wailed, collapsing to the ground. "Please stop. I surrender." Mama Rose didn't respond. She knew he was just trying to save himself. She turned her attention to Hammer, who was still clutching his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. He was a tougher target, more alert and aware of his surroundings. She circled around him, using the cornstalks as concealment. She moved with the grace and agility of a seasoned hunter, her senses heightened, her instincts sharp. She was in her element. The years had faded away and she was once again the legendary sniper, Viper. Before Mama Rose could engage Hammer, a memory flashed through her mind. A dusty battlefield, the scorching sun beating down, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. She was younger, leaner, a soldier in her prime. She remembered a mission, a critical one, where she had to eliminate a high-value target. Flashback sequence start. The target was a ruthless warlord responsible for countless deaths. He was holed up in a heavily guarded compound, surrounded by loyal soldiers. The odds were stacked against her, but she couldn't fail. She spent days studying the compound, memorizing every detail, every guard patrol, every blind spot. She planned her attack meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. Under the cover of darkness, she infiltrated the compound, moving like a shadow, avoiding detection. She used her skills to bypass security measures, disabling alarms and silencing guards with swift precision. She reached her vantage point, a rooftop overlooking the warlord's headquarters. She set up her rifle, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, focusing her mind, shutting out the fear and doubt. She lined up her shot, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. She waited for the perfect moment, the moment when the warlord was exposed, vulnerable. The moment came and she squeezed the trigger. The shot was true, the warlord fell, and the mission was a success. Flashback sequence end. Back in the present, Mama Rose blinked, the memory fading. She shook her head, clearing her mind. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. She had a job to do. Hammer, realizing he was alone and outmatched, decided to make a run for it. He stumbled towards the cornfield, hoping to lose himself in the dense foliage. He was slow and clumsy, his injured shoulder hindering his movements. Mama Rose watched him go, a hint of pity in her eyes. She could have easily taken him down, but she hesitated. She didn't want to kill anyone. She just wanted them to leave her alone. She fired a shot into the air, a warning to stop. Hammer ignored her, continuing to stumble towards the cornfield. She sighed. It seemed she had no choice. She lined up her shot, aiming for his leg. She squeezed the trigger, and the rifle roared. Hammer cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground, clutching his thigh. He was down, but he wasn't out. He scrambled to his feet, trying to crawl towards the cornfield. Mama Rose approached him cautiously, her rifle trained on his chest. "Stay down," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's over. There's no point in running." Hammer looked up at her, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He was defeated, exhausted, and in pain. He knew she was right. It was over. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Just let me go. I won't come back. I promise." Mama Rose considered his plea. She looked at his face, searching for any sign of deceit. She saw only fear and regret. Just then, a rustling sound came from the cornfield. Mama Rose whirled around, her rifle raised, her senses on high alert. Something was moving in the corn. The rustling grew louder, closer. Mama Rose tightened her grip on her rifle, her eyes narrowed, scanning the cornstalks. Suddenly, Whisper emerged from the cornfield, his face pale with terror, his eyes wide with fear. He stumbled towards Mama Rose, his hands raised in surrender. "Please, don't shoot," he cried, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to do this. I just wanted to go home." Mama Rose lowered her rifle slightly, but she remained cautious. She had seen too much in her life to trust anyone blindly. "Where's Twitch?" she asked, her voice firm. Whisper shook his head, his eyes darting nervously around the field. "I don't know. I haven't seen him since the shooting started. He ran off towards the truck." Mama Rose turned her attention towards the truck, scanning the area with her night vision goggles. She spotted Twitch huddled behind the vehicle, his body shaking uncontrollably. He was unarmed and clearly terrified. She turned back to Whisper, her expression softening slightly. He was just a kid, caught up in something he didn't understand. She could see the fear in his eyes, the regret in his face. "It's over," she said, her voice gentler this time. "Just stay where you are. The police are on their way." Whisper nodded, his body trembling. He sank to his knees, his head bowed in surrender. Mama Rose holstered her rifle, her body relaxing slightly. The fight was over. The Rattlers were defeated. Her farm was safe. But something still troubled her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something wasn't quite right. Where was Twitch going to run off to now? He would likely be back to his old habits. She had to make sure the cycle ended. It was time to show some compassion. It was time to give him a second chance. Mama Rose approached the truck slowly, her hands raised, signaling her peaceful intentions. Twitch remained huddled behind the vehicle, his eyes squeezed shut, his body trembling violently. "It's all right, son," she said, her voice gentle and soothing. "It's over. You're safe now." Twitch slowly opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on Mama Rose. He stared at her in disbelief, his face etched with fear and confusion. "Please, please don't hurt me," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mama Rose replied, her voice calm and reassuring. "I just want to talk to you." She knelt down, placing herself at his level. She looked at him intently, her eyes filled with compassion. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Why did you come here tonight?" Twitch hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the field. He seemed afraid to speak, afraid of what she might do. We needed the money," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Snake said it would be easy." Mama Rose sighed. She had heard that story before. Desperation, misguided loyalty, and poor choices, the ingredients for a life gone wrong. "There's another way, son," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "There's always another way. You don't have to live like this." She offered him her hand, her expression filled with hope. "Come with me," she said. "Let me help you. Let me show you a better life." Twitch stared at her hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never known such kindness, such compassion. He hesitated for a moment, torn between fear and hope. Then, slowly, tentatively, he reached out and took her hand. Just then, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. The police were close. Mama Rose helped Twitch to his feet, leading him towards the farmhouse. He walked beside her, his head bowed, his body still trembling. As they reached the porch, the first police car pulled into the driveway, its headlights illuminating the scene. Two officers emerged from the vehicle, their guns drawn. "Freeze! Police!" one of the officers shouted. "Drop your weapons." Mama Rose raised her hands in the air, signaling her surrender. "It's all right, officers," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm the homeowner. These men were trying to rob me." The officers approached cautiously, their eyes scanning the scene. They quickly assessed the situation, noting the wounded men, the scattered weapons, and the obvious signs of a struggle. "What happened here?" one of the officers asked, his gaze fixed on Mama Rose. "They came to rob me," Mama Rose replied. "I defended myself." The officers holstered their weapons, their expressions softening slightly. They recognized Mama Rose as a respected member of the community. They had never known her to be in trouble before. "We received a call about gunshots," one of the officers said. "Are there any other suspects?" "Just these four," Mama Rose replied, gesturing towards Snake, Hammer, Whisper, and Twitch. "They're all accounted for." The officers placed the Rattlers under arrest, reading them their rights. Snake and Hammer were taken into custody, their injuries attended to. Whisper and Twitch were also taken into custody, their faces filled with fear and regret. As the police led them away, Twitch looked back at Mama Rose, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He knew he had made a mistake, but he also knew that she had given him a second chance. A chance to turn his life around. A chance to be a better person. And he wouldn't let her down. The sun began to rise, painting the eastern sky with hues of pink and gold. The police had finished their investigation, gathering evidence and taking statements. The wounded men had been transported to the hospital, and the remaining members of the Rattlers were now behind bars. Mama Rose stood on her porch, watching as the last police car pulled away. The farm was quiet once more, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. She took a deep breath, the fresh morning air filling her lungs. The night had been long and difficult, but it was finally over. She had defended her home, protected her peace, and given a young man a second chance. She looked out over her fields, her heart filled with a sense of gratitude. Her farm was more than just a place to live. It was her sanctuary, her refuge, her connection to the earth. It was a place where she could find peace and solace, a place where she could be herself. She knew that the events of the night would stay with her for a long time. She couldn't deny the past, the skills she had learned, the person she had once been. But she also knew that she had changed, that she was no longer Viper, the cold and ruthless sniper. She was Mama Rose, the sweet old lady who loved her farm and her roses. And she was determined to live her life to the fullest, to embrace the peace and beauty that surrounded her, and to make a difference in the world, however small. She knew this world needed more loving and caring. The night had definitely been a testament to that. Mama Rose walked down to her rose garden, the morning dew clinging to the delicate petals. She carefully pruned a few of the roses, her touch gentle and loving. The roses were her pride and joy, a symbol of the peace and beauty she had worked so hard to create. As she tended to her roses, she thought about Twitch. She hoped he would take this opportunity to turn his life around, to find a better path. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she believed in him. She had seen the spark of hope in his eyes, the glimmer of regret in his face. She also thought about Snake and Hammer. She didn't hate them, but she felt a sense of sadness for them. They had made poor choices, and those choices had led them down a dark path. She hoped they would find a way to learn from their mistakes, to find redemption. She knew that the world was full of darkness and violence, but she also knew that it was full of light and love. She had seen both sides of humanity, the best and the worst. And she had chosen to focus on the good, to spread love and compassion wherever she could. She finished pruning her roses, her heart filled with peace and contentment. She looked out over her farm, the sun shining brightly on the fields of green and gold. She was Mama Rose, the sweet old lady who loved her farm and her roses. And she was also Viper, the legendary sniper who knew how to protect herself and her home. She was both, and she was proud of who she was. She was ready for whatever the future held, confident that she could face any challenge with courage, compassion, and a little bit of old-fashioned grit. The farm was hers. The peace was hers. And she would defend it always.